Good evening. My name is Huang Bui, and I am a Kevin Harrington Student Ambassador. And on behalf of faculty, staff, and students at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College, I would like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for this evening's event. The Institute's mission is to educate, engage, and empower citizens of all ages to actively participate in the civic and political life of their communities and strengthen democracy. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse any political issues or candidates. Before we begin tonight's event, I would just like to remind you to please turn off any cell phones or any other devices that make noise. And following Peter Hamby's remarks, we will have a brief question and answer period. Please line up at the microphones located on each side of the auditorium if you wish to ask a question. Tonight, WMUR's.com political director, James Pindle, will moderate the discussion with the CNN's Peter Hamby. Peter Hamby is an influential political reporter for CNN based in Washington, D.C. He has traveled to many states and key political battlegrounds to cover news that impacts the nation at both state and local levels. In particular, during the 2012 presidential election, he broke a number of major political stories, including the news that Governor Rick Perry would drop out the race and Florida's decision to move their 2012 primary date and amend the Republican nominating calendar. After the election, he was named one of the 10 breakout political reporters of 2012 by Politico. Peter Hamby was also a spring 2013 fellow at John Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy at Harvard University Kennedy School of Government, where he authored a widely circulated study on the impact of Twitter on media behavior and campaign press strategy. Did Twitter kill the boys on the bus? It is with great honor that we welcome Peter Hamby tonight to talk about his outstanding work. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Peter Hamby.
Great job. Hello, I'm James Pindle from WMUR TV. We're going to show this format's going to work. We're going to talk to Peter a little bit about, he's going to introduce and talk about the point of the paper, what he was trying to study, and where it came from. And then I'm going to ask him a couple questions, but the heart of this whole thing is your questions. And this is New Hampshire. There's a tradition. We're going to grill this guy. And I'm sure you have a lot of great questions. So Peter, welcome back to New Hampshire.
Thanks, good to be here.
I'm not going to ask if you're testing the waters at all, so that's very good. But let's just start talking about this paper, which is just absolutely excellent. Did Twitter kill the boys on the bus? Talk a little bit about the origin, why you decided this topic, and what you learned.
Kind of two reasons. One, after every campaign, I was kind of jealous, and you might be jealous of this too. Campaign operatives kind of get to take some time off. They're kind of forced to take some time off.
Some don't have jobs after election days.
You have to find jobs.
We have a job.
You're in the wilderness. You go on vacation. You think. You reflect. You meditate. I'm not jealous of their unemployment, but I'm kind of jealous of that sort of space. So after the campaign ended in 2012, I had the opportunity to do this fellowship at the Kennedy School of Government and had to write a paper on some aspect of the media and the political media. And I started to think about the difference between 2008 and 2012, which were the two presidential campaigns that I'd covered. And I was on the plane in the bubble, as they say, with Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney and John McCain and Sarah Palin, and I have lots of stories about that we can talk about if you want. But the candidates were there. Their advisors were there. They were on the plane. They were talking to you. And I can't stress enough, if you've read a lot of campaign history, much of the storytelling, the primary journalism about presidential campaigns always emerged from the bus, from the plane. You were out there on the road with the candidate, really in the general election sense. When I was out covering Mitt Romney, I went in the bubble a few times and never wanted to go back in there again. And it turns out I wasn't alone in that. There are a number of other journalists who said the same thing. And it wasn't because we didn't like Mitt Romney for any particular reason. His staff wasn't there, really, and the candidate wasn't there. He wasn't talking. And I started to think about my lifespan in Washington and the state of the political media. I moved to DC and started working at CNN in 2005, before Politico, before YouTube, before Twitter. And between then and 2013, the state of the media had just changed so much. And it had really had a strong impact on the relationship between reporters in the press and campaign operatives and candidates. Candidates are often now afraid of reporters because we have Twitter, we have iPhones. Everything is immediately projected onto the internet, or it can be. There is no filter. Whereas when the boys on the bus, the sort of founding, document about the way reporters cover presidential campaigns in 1972, you could, go out with the candidate after a long day and have a beer and crack jokes. And those things didn't immediately find their way onto Twitter and didn't become public. So it's just, Twitter has really changed the way campaigns are run. And I did about 70 interviews with reporters and people that worked in the Romney campaign about, these movements in the media. And I sat down to write a 15-page paper, and it turned into a 95-page paper. So it was kind of a cathartic exercise in that respect.
There's a recent Pew Research study showed something like 3% of Americans were actually on Twitter. Mm-hmm. Given that it has been a medium largely of elites, why does this really matter? You go so far as to say, and I don't disagree with you, mm-hmm. I don't disagree with pretty much anything you write in this, that Twitter is now the number one. That's where the conversation takes place, particularly for Washington journalists. Right.
Well, the conventional wisdom used to be formed in Washington, I guess, mm-hmm. or in Manchester, any state capital, by an amalgam of TV talk shows, radio shows, newspapers, water cooler gossip, talk at the bar, a sort of hodgepodge of things that eventually sort of radiated out into the public. And public opinion, changed depending on what the media was saying. I think people should care. Yes, you're right. The Pew study that was conducted during the election showed that 13% of Americans were on Twitter and only 3% of Americans were tweeting.
Right.
And Twitter is, a collection of sort of niche communities. Like if you like sports, if you like music, if you like fashion, hip hop, whatever, politics, you follow people that are interested in that. And after a while, according to a number of reporters I talked to and political operatives, you start to talk to each other. I follow you on Twitter, I retweet you on Twitter. You're talking about Scott Brown, and other people are talking about Scott Brown, and everyone's tweeting about it. But most Americans aren't following that. The reason it matters, though, is that we sort of form our consensus on Twitter, and that's what makes it into the New York Times. That's what makes it into Politico. That's what makes it onto the evening news, onto the Today Show, and that's sort of what gets projected out there into the bigger universe. So Twitter is really the gathering place for the political class right now, and I don't know. Again, I think it's really changing the way conventional wisdom is formed.
But again, you start this. Let's just back this up a bit. You start this conversation really as a boy on the bus, and obviously the females now on the bus and on the plane very much now, which
Lots
is the case.
Lots of female reporters on the campaign.
There are. Who is in this bubble now? Why are they in this bubble? Explain that world.
Sure. Okay. So in 1972, when Tim Krause wrote The Boys on the Bus, the Bigfoot reporters were out on the road. David Broder, Jack Dermond, Bob Novak. And again, they were out there with the candidate. They were writing the big narratives of the campaign that would land in the papers and drive television coverage. Today, fast forward to 2012, it's a very young group of reporters. It's a mixture of TV producers. That was my first job covering a campaign. I was an embed. All the TV networks have embeds, and basically what that means is you're embedded with the candidate. You are there full time on body watch. Anything Mitt Romney says or does, anytime he tweaks his stump speech, anytime he makes a gaffe, anytime he eats some silly food, you are documenting it with a video camera, you're writing a blog post about it, you're tweeting about it, etc. And then in the print space, you also have a lot of younger reporters, and then you have all the digital properties, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Politico, they're out there. The reason it's so young now is it consumes your life. You know, if you have a family, if you're older, you can't just live on the road for what is essentially now a 2-year presidential campaign. So it draws a lot of young people who are willing to not be paid very much, who are willing to pick up, fly around the country, you know, live off a corporate card, live in a plane and hotels for 2 years. It's fun. It's pretty fun if you're like a 25-year-old kid going out there and doing it. The downside to that, according to many members of the Romney campaign that I talked to, is that the press corps lacks gravitas, experience, context. I interviewed Stuart Stevens, who was Romney's sort of all-purpose media strategist, at length, and he said he talked to reporters who didn't know how to read a poll, who couldn't recognize pretty famous political figures like Ralph Reed and Pat Robertson, you know, and they saw that as a problem. And yet these were the folks that were, again, setting the narrative on Twitter, really, on the web, every day. And they thought that to be a major problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You also go a little bit about how Obama and Romney had a different strategy with the press and different strategies about Twitter itself. Mm-hmm. Compare and contrast those for a little bit.
Well, I think, look, the Obama campaign, and I lay out sort of early on in the paper, using the Romney campaign as a case study to study how the media is sort of changing in the internet universe is tough because Romney was sort of a cautious guy. The Obama campaign had so many advantages, you know, incumbency. They were, you know, able to build a campaign apparatus many years ahead of time, and the Romney campaign had to kind of play catch up. And the Obama campaign had a bigger staff. They had hundreds and hundreds of people in Chicago monitoring every tweet or whatever. I think, and again, this isn't me speaking alone, any number of reporters that I interviewed for this paper said they thought the Obama campaign adapted better to Twitter. There were no rules about Twitter in newsrooms. I mean, this all sort of happened. Like Washington, the political class discovered Twitter like in 2009 and 2010, and that was the midterms. And all of a sudden it's a presidential race, and we're all tweeting, and we're not really thinking about what we're tweeting and like how it's impacting coverage, how it's impacting campaign strategy. So a lot of the campaign people were learning this stuff on the fly. The Romney campaign really kind of shut down a little bit as it related to the press. If they saw a tweet they thought was, you know, offensive, they'd get mad about it. I think the Obama campaign did a better job of just sort of reaching out and like massaging things. I talked to David Axelrod for this, and he said they learned their biggest lesson about Twitter at the first debate in Denver.
Right.
When
talk about that. Let's actually separate that out because
yeah.
you know, this was not going well. Mm-hmm. You could see it, but boy, follow the Twitter feed. This was a disaster.
Yeah, it was game over.
And it was, you know, you talk about this moment from Ben Smith, but
mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So we were in the press file in Denver at the first debate. Look, traditionally at a presidential debate or any debate, you know, the information, the consensus of what happened is sort of rendered, and you know, a little bit after in the spin room afterwards, reporters kind of talk around and figure out, you know, okay, this is I think what happened. You trust your own judgment. If you were watching Twitter during the first debate, everyone, and it wasn't just the political class, because millions of people were watching the debate, was saying, wow, Obama looks off, something's up here. Romney looks really good. Wow, Romney looks presidential. Ben Smith, who is the editor of BuzzFeed, a smart political guy, just decided, you know, why do we need to wait to the end of the debate to say that Mitt Romney won the debate? We can already tell, because look at Twitter. This is where the consensus is being formed. Everyone says Mitt Romney has won. And 40 minutes into the debate, he posts on BuzzFeed, why Mitt Romney won the debate. And he was right. And you could see it in the spin room after the debate. Jim, you were in there. The Romney campaign like charged into the spin room, like high-fiving, and the Obama campaign, I believe it was Stephanie Cutter and David Plouffe were there from the Obama campaign. They could not get out of there fast enough. They did not want to be in there. This was another advantage that the Romney campaign, this is one advantage the Romney campaign had with this lengthy primary season, was they saw how consensus was formed on Twitter during all of those debates. So they would watch the debates and see what reporters were tweeting about, so they would know what to talk about in the spin room after the debate. And the Obama campaign, according to David Axelrod, was not really prepared for that. They were caught off guard by it. So in the second debate, they were able to sort of flack, with reporters throughout the debate, people who were tweeting, doing rapid response, and putting fact checks out there to different reporters during the debate in a way that they didn't do in Denver, which was a total disaster for those guys.
Romney, you go on to say, Twitter helped reinforce a lot of this negative feelings that they had towards the press because they were tweeting some stupid stuff and. Right? I mean,
yeah, that's absolutely the case.
I mean, they're tweeting this dumb.
Well, this is the thing. It's hard to blame the Romney campaign for getting frustrated about
right.
These
Exactly.
things. It was a tough endless cycle here. Again, because the candidates today are so terrified, frankly, of the press tweeting every single little thing. Campaigns are keeping the candidates away from reporters. So what is a reporter left to do? If you're traveling around the country on an airplane and no one's talking to you,
spending a lot of money, your bosses are yelling at you.
Spending a ton of money. TV networks, including CNN, would spend north of $50,000 a week traveling people on the plane with these candidates. It's a ton of money. Will Ritter, who was the director of advance for the Romney campaign, called it the news hole. And these young reporters would sit on the plane. Sometimes they'd be drinking beer, sometimes they wouldn't, and just tweet jokes at each other and tweet snark and try to one-up each other. And I was guilty of that too. A lot of reporters are guilty of that. So the Romney campaign would see this and be like, why do I have to deal with these people who are making fun of my candidate every day? What's the incentive for us to talk to them if they're going to, make fun of Mitt Romney's jeans or his haircut or whatever silly thing he said? Matt Rhodes, who was Romney's campaign manager, referenced something called the orchestra pit theory, which is pretty interesting. Roger Ailes, the Fox News chairman, used to be a political operative. He used to work for Richard Nixon. That's where he became famous. He has a theory about the political media called the orchestra pit theory, which is you have two candidates standing on a stage. One guy says he's got a solution to Middle East peace, or the Middle East peace process, and the other guy falls in the orchestra pit. What's the media going to cover? They're going to cover the guy that falls in the orchestra pit. So Matt Rhodes has said the back of the plane for us was a bunch of reporters waiting for Mitt to fall in the orchestra pit. Mitt Romney could give a press conference, do 5 or 6 questions about the alternative minimum tax or Russia, and then someone's going to ask him about Rihanna. And he'll say something goofy about like Rihanna and Chris Brown or something, and that's the story, because that's the sort of most salacious, clickable thing. That's our incentive today in a lot of ways.
Rubio can talk about Tupac, as you also mentioned.
Yeah, that's true. Rubio's good at talking about rap. So yeah, it's a sort of tough cycle. And talking to campaign operatives, no one sees a solution to this. I had lunch with a fairly prominent Republican governor a couple weeks ago at the Republican Governors Association out in Arizona, and this person said, how can the media get better? How can we work with them better? I didn't have an answer for that, but they're scared. I mean, editors at newspapers are terrified for lots of reasons. The web is disrupting their bottom lines, but campaigns are scared of the media too.
And a couple more questions. I want to open this up to you guys. What is retweet journalism?
This is interesting. Retweet journalism is when this is a term coined by Tim Pearson, who is an advisor to Governor Nikki Haley in South Carolina, who doesn't like reporters very much, but he understands how quickly Twitter can shape media narratives. He calls retweet journalism when a reporter just blindly retweets something without bothering to make a phone call to see whether or not it's true. The example that Tim used was a story about Governor Haley that a blogger posted in South Carolina in 2012 that Governor Haley was about to be indicted by the feds for tax fraud. No one really knew who this blogger was, and yet that for whatever reason that day, that tweet linking to that story on some blog that no one read was retweeted by reporters from CBS, BuzzFeed, Politico, major national reporters. So these reporters are immediately lifting this story up and putting it into the national bloodstream without actually, bothering to check out whether it's correct or not. Or having two sources, right? And that's the other problem about Twitter, I think, is at WMUR, or at CNN, or at the Washington Post, or New York Times, Politico. When you have a story or a scoop or something, you have to go through your editorial process. If we have a big story, you need two sources, and your bureau chief or your editor needs to, go through that with you before you can post. It's a big deal. But those stories hit Twitter with an equal velocity as a sketchy blog post. And they're all in that mix together. In some ways, this is good. I mean, Twitter has been good for journalists in a lot of ways because it's a meritocracy. It's allowed young, hungry reporters, and if any of you guys want to be reporters, I mean, it's actually a good time to be a young reporter in journalism. The pay might not be great, but you can punch through a ceiling that existed just 5 years ago that isn't there anymore. If you are good, hungry, you're smart, you're funny, you have a take, you can rise up based on Twitter. People will follow you, and it's also a good self-corrector. Bad journalism, as much as there is retweet journalism, gets corrected pretty quickly now in a way that it did not used to.
So let's bring it back a little bit, and then I want to open up for questions after this one. You at the end talk about what the press can do better for next time. Mm-hmm. You talk about what campaigns can do better for next time. If I'm just a voter, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to just block all this out?
Someone asked me this question recently too, and I honestly have no answer for you. I don't.
A lot of this seems like this garbage. Now you want to, but a lot of the Twitter traffic it's irrelevant garbage. It's not going to help me make a decision on who's the best to run the country.
Yeah, and look, if you are, a regular person, live in Austin, Texas, or Toledo, or Sacramento, or whatever, you don't care that Scott Brown is in Londonderry tonight, right? We care deeply. Yeah. So chances are, if they don't care, they're not following you on Twitter in the first place. I think I just wanted to write this paper to illuminate for people sort of the sausage making, like why what they're seeing on the evening news or the Today Show, or reading in their local paper, how that story kind of came to be in today's sort of media ecosystem. Because I'm not sure that everyone. I mean, we all take Twitter for granted. I mean, how many of you guys look at Twitter? And how many of you guys get news on your phones? How many of you guys watched the evening news this week at least once? So
wow, that's a lot.
That's more than I thought. Good. Okay.
He didn't say at 6:30. You could have watched it online.
Yeah, you DVR'd it,
that's
or
right.
you watched a clip on your phone or whatever. But I was actually surprised that a lot of people didn't know this happened, that this was the case, that Twitter was really the central watering hole, the gathering place, the editorial desk for so many people in the press corps in Washington and New York. A big complaint, again, for a lot of reporters that were out covering Romney, like when you're out covering Romney or whatever candidate, you want to be out there finding stories, digging up stuff, like getting color, talking to people. A big complaint was that a lot of editors back home in New York and DC were just watching Twitter all day. And so, Ashley Parker from the New York Times will get a call from her editor and say, did you see this thing on Twitter that they just said about Romney? Can you confirm this? Can you confirm this? And all of her time is chasing what people back home are telling her to do, which is the opposite of what it used to be. It used to be that you're on the plane, you're determining what the news is, in consultation with your editor, but you're calling it in, you're emailing it in, or whatever. Now the agenda is being set just on Twitter, and it's, the people on the plane are increasingly irrelevant because, they're not setting the news every day, and the candidate's not talking to them to set the news either.
Great. Let's open this up for questions. We have mics over there and there. So go ahead and ask away if you have a question. Great. Great.
So first off, do you you're talking about how politicians don't really like the whole Twitter agenda. Do you think that's a situation where the politicians need to evolve to kind of deal with the new communication climate? Or is it that journalists should devolve and stop using Twitter as this medium?
It's a combination. I think from the journalist perspective, again, the last section of this paper, which you can read online for free, it's on Harvard's website, talks about recommendations for 2016. I do think a lot of reporters that I talked to felt a little guilty about some of the way they behaved on Twitter. And a lot of political operatives said they think reporters need to either be trained in how to use Twitter or have an editor for their tweets. And I do think that even since the election we've seen, I don't know if you guys in the Romney campaign who are here agree with me, I think people are dialing it back a little bit. People aren't as over the top and snarky and mean and petty and just chasing every little thing as they were during the campaign. I think we're sort of evolving a little bit in the way we use Twitter, which is a good thing. But I think editors making their assignments for 2016 will have to sort of say like, hey, like, just think twice before sending that. I sent a tweet one time about like some outfit Mitt Romney was wearing, and Andrea Saul fired a missile at me, Romney's press secretary, and she was right. Why did I tweet that? And I haven't really done that many snarky tweets since then, to be honest. But from a campaign perspective, I was talking to Ann about this on the way over here. Dan Balls asked John McCain this question: do you think the Straight Talk Express could exist today? And McCain said, no, there's no way. The reporters are too young. There's no filter. Every little gaffe and will make it out there on the internet. I talked to Chuck Todd for this, who said there might be someone who can crack that code in the Twitter era, where reporters, hopefully we're evolving a little bit, will be a little more forgiving if a candidate says something, off color, and we realize, hey, that's just a little bit of a slip up. Don't worry about it. We're not going to tweet that. Or they'll just flood the zone. The opposite of the Romney strategy, which is to like shut the media out completely, would be to just completely barrage them with everything. And we won't be able to keep up. And that might be another way to do it. So one other point I make in this paper, which I think is important for 2016, looking at the people who might run. Jeb Bush, Hillary Clinton. Jeb Bush's last statewide campaign was 2006? No, 2002. 2002. Hillary Clinton. Look, a lot of reporters who are covering politics now were not even in elementary school when the Clintons were in the White House. So they don't necessarily hold the Clintons in the same esteem that a lot of our older colleagues in the press do. And also from Hillary's perspective, she's not as sort of fluent in Twitter. In 2008, when she ran last time, no one was using Twitter in politics, especially the press. But look at someone like Chris Christie or Marco Rubio, who have come of age politically in the YouTube, Twitter era. They're kind of at ease,
It's been an asset for them.
Yeah,
particularly Chris Christie.
Totally,
Yeah.
shooting from the cuff with reporters. They know it's going to get on Twitter. They're used to this political environment in a way that other candidates, like John McCain, might not be, even though John McCain has a ton of Twitter followers.
This is off topic. This is one of the reasons I'm going to be fascinated in our U.S. Senate race in New Hampshire. Bob Smith is running. In his last campaign, I was the only reporter with the first generation of a BlackBerry.
Oh, really?
And people would call it a pager. I don't know how he's gonna. He doesn't have a Twitter handle. I don't know how this is gonna work for him. It's gonna be fascinating to see how that.
Yeah, I
plays out.
don't see that as tenable, frankly.
Well, he'll have to figure it out, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Hi, great talk, very interesting. Welcome to St. Anselm and the New Hampshire Institute of Politics.
Thank you.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, you're saying that Twitter is really influencing what people are putting on the news, and it gets started on Twitter. So if that's the case, which I believe it is, because I use Twitter to check my news. Oh, CNN breaking news, it notifies me, and I don't even need to turn on the news to know that
Don't tell him that. He
Mandela
doesn't wanna hear
passed
that.
away.
You have to turn on the news after that.
I wish I had the time, but not during finals.
Just teasing.
But if that's the case, do you think, especially with our generation, I mean, maybe we have a lot of different type of students here that do watch the news, but I know a lot of people our age and maybe early 20s are using their phones and Twitter and Facebook maybe as their means of getting news. Do you think that Twitter is now going to take the lead and surpass nightly news as our generation grows up? Like, is that going to outdate nightly news? Is Twitter going to change that?
Not anytime soon, but the importance of TV is absolutely waning. There's no question about that. Pew did a ton of great research during the campaign about how people were processing information through the media. If you were under the age of 30 in 2012, you weren't watching TV news. Only about a third of people under 30 watch TV news in the last week or something like that. Mobile, so TV, newspapers, this way, TV, this way.
And interestingly, local news is always number one until this one, and cable knocked it out by a little bit.
Yeah, but even cable viewership is
I know,
desktop, laptop computers, pretty steady. Mobile is going like that. Even at CNN, we have made a huge investment in digital. My paycheck now comes from digital because I'm sort of native to that. I mean, we're all native to that now. We get all of our news on our phones, and that's okay. But I don't think, look, nightly news gets, 8 million viewers a night. Twitter, especially politics, influences only a tiny segment of the population. But its growth potential is huge. Some 16% of the country is now on Twitter, whereas 90% of the country is on Facebook. So Facebook's kind of plateaued. Twitter's got a lot of potential. But whereas it might not take over the evening news, I do think that digital as a whole will surpass TV. I mean, the only reason I have cable is to watch sports and HBO. That's it. I mean, and CNN.
And C-SPAN.
And C-SPAN, obviously. But otherwise, I'm not alone in that. I'm 32 years old, and plenty of my friends wish they could just drop their cable subscription, but they can't because they want news and sports, but they don't need 282 channels, and they want to watch things on their own terms, on their own time. I haven't watched a commercial in at least a week.
Except for CNN. You watch them all.
Except for CNN, I watch all of them. Yeah. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, well, it also, sorry, one more point on this. In the ranks of campaign politics, there's just this big generational churn, I think, going on where people like us just use the web all the time. People are starting, in the campaign ranks, people are starting web ad firms instead of TV ad firms. And they just realizing the potential, the growth potential that's there for the web. Whereas, and the Romney and the Obama campaign sort of got this too with their TV ad buys. They weren't just buying local news; they were buying very sort of niche, targeted ads. So yeah, that's my only other point on that. Yeah.
Good. Good. While he's asking that question, I'm going to ask you a question when he gets up there.
Yeah.
It's a longer answer, I know, so I apologize, but what does this mean for the New Hampshire primary? I mean, it's been a system that has always been extremely transparent. Town hall meeting after town hall meeting. It's not just reporters. Everyone's got a phone. Everyone can broadcast. And the idea of retail politics, of getting out on the hustings, it's different. Particularly you saw with Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
It's different. It's different for a lot of campaigns who kind of think it through a little bit.
Yeah, and look, you know way more about New Hampshire than I do. I'm actually more fluent in Iowa and South Carolina than New Hampshire, no offense. But you're totally right. If you are a Republican candidate running in the primary, and we saw this in 2012, you can go on Fox News and reach really directly a ton of primary voters in 5 minutes. And even the Romney campaign admitted that Fox News is a safe environment for Republicans. So you're not going to get asked a lot of hard questions there. You know, I really have a hard time. Maybe I'm just whimsical, and I hope this doesn't change. But how many primary voters are there in New Hampshire?
That will vote in one of the primaries?
Yeah, in a presidential.
About 150 to about 100 to 150, depends on how many thousand.
Okay. So if it's like a smaller, I actually think this is counterintuitive, but if it's a smaller sort of primary, I feel like you do have to go out there and shake hands still. Whereas like in South Carolina, which is like...
You've seen there's more risks involved, but you're right.
Yeah. But South Carolina is like 500,000 primary voters.
Right.
So you can't hit everyone. So you kind of have to just go TV, radio, whatever. But yeah, I think the way that campaigns can control their own messages, you don't have to do local media anymore necessarily. You still do. But you can create an infographic on Facebook and share that. And you don't have to ask, no annoying reporter is asking you questions when you're putting out a tweet or when you're creating a web ad and sharing it. Primary voters are pretty wired. I mean, they're plugged in. Like I'm friends with probably too many Republican and Democrat, primary activists in New Hampshire and Iowa, and like I see their Facebook traffic. That's the way a lot of activists communicate, is on social media now. So, why go on local news? Why have Pindle ask you a tough question on MUR when you can just...
Because we have 150,000 viewers, which is the...
Yeah.
Or 200...
No, I know.
And that's the
I'm just saying they weigh these things now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Scott. I'm a freshman politics major here, and since I was a freshman last year, I was in high school, and throughout the whole 2012 election, I noticed a lot of juniors, sophomores, and freshmen all had these Twitter accounts. And it seems like the more Twitter accounts there are per grade that was younger. So as we get towards the 2016 election, all of these Twitter accounts will become voting age eligible, as they weren't in 2012, which will most likely expand the potential, as you touched upon. So I was wondering what you think, as more more Twitter users become voting age people, how you think either party could grasp onto the demographic of the Twitter users that are becoming voting eligible.
Yeah, I mean, that just cuts to sort of what we were just talking about. I mean, because young voters are tough to find and contact, and they're tough to motivate, frankly. They don't necessarily show up. So that the web just gives, an access point to reach young voters. On Twitter, social media, whatever. So, I think, again, this is why sort of the old media is sort of dying and digital is rising. It's just that we all use the media in a different way that our, older friends do. And you're native to that. You're going to get your news from Twitter. In 10 years, maybe you'll still be getting news from Twitter. So. It's just, again, that's just a key access point for campaigns to reach young voters, is the web.
Good. Any more questions? Yep.
Yeah.
This is Jim Merrill, who led Mitt Romney's campaign here.
Peter, good to
Your
have you.
winning campaign.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. It's great having you here, and I just want to say it was a fantastic piece of work you put together with this. Really enjoyed it, and this has been really great. So thanks for being here in New Hampshire. Two questions. The first one, you talked about, we all know how quickly this all evolved and the lack of policies and procedures to kind of govern how this all unfolded with reporters and everything else. I remember, I think I signed up for Twitter back in 2008. And so I remember, the first time it struck me that the power of the medium when I was Scott Brown's special, and I followed on Twitter all the results coming in that I couldn't get in, anywhere else. Can you talk about whether there were any policies, with the news organizations that governed how the embeds and the reporters tweeted? Did that change over the course of the campaign as there were some issues and slip-ups over time? And if there were, be curious to know how that worked, and do you expect that in 2016? That's one. And then two, just to your earlier talk about how candidates will have to evolve. Is a Cory Booker-style Twitter feed the future of our candidates and elected officials? Curious.
I'll answer the second one first. I actually unfollowed Cory Booker just because he retweets everyone that's saying, hey, what's up? It was good to see you at this event today. And he'll be like, love you too, bro. Like, retweet you. It's just like kind of childish almost, like a little unbecoming even for, frankly, a U.S. senator. But, you know, who am I to say where things are going? As to guidelines, look, I know from CNN's perspective, and I'm certain other news organizations do, we have social media guidelines. A lot of it revolves around not tweeting out other unconfirmed information, so-called retweet journalism, which is what we were talking about. We saw this today with Mandela, who died. There was some Twitter buzz about it, and CNN has pretty strict editorial policies, and we have really, really good journalists, frankly. And, you know, a note was sent around saying, just a reminder, like, let's wait until we can confirm this. So we played it safe. I do not think, though, that I didn't really see a lot of, you know, editorial changes across the board, or heard of any sort of crackdowns It didn't seem like it. You know, but it depended. I mean, Ben Smith said, like, he didn't want his guys at BuzzFeed tweeting, you know, inane crap on Twitter, you know, and he told them only tweet smart stuff. We can go back and look at those tweets to see if he was right or not. I just don't think so. I think we all kind of were figuring out as it happened, as you mentioned. Twitter just kind of like exploded at some point in 2009, and we kind of never looked back and took a pause and said, are we doing this right? But again, I do think, I don't know if you agree that the snark has dialed back a little bit. And man, I know, I have friends my friend Scott, he works for Real Clear Politics, he's a great reporter. But some days he'll email me and be like, oh, did you see this thing on Twitter? Oh man, like, that's so dumb. I'm like, dude, just close Twitter, back away. You'd be surprised, the number of reporters I talked to who said, I think more clearly, I write more clearly when I'm not on Twitter all day. It just kind of scrambles your brain if it's what you look at the first thing in the morning, the last thing before you go to bed. You can't like think cohesive thoughts. And also, Twitter's a negative place. Sorry to harp on Pew, but Pew measured the negativity of a bunch of different media platforms during the 2012 campaign, just sort of the tone of the way people were talking about President Obama, Mitt Romney, you know, in television, in newspapers, on the radio. Twitter was the bottom of the barrel, below Facebook. It's just a negative, snarky place, just generally. So that kind of feeds, you know, you absorb some of that when you're on Twitter all day. So I think people are just being a little more judicious now. But again, number of editors I talked to said they're going to think a little more clearly heading into 2016 about do tweet this, don't tweet that.
I would suspect that if you look back at Twitter feeds for operatives on the campaigns that tweeted regularly and go back to those feeds during the debates and other major events, I think you'd see a similar level of snark from us. And I think I'm frightened. I can look at it myself, actually. So.
Yeah, but you guys are allowed to be snarky. We're supposed to be objective, I guess.
Any more questions? I want to talk a little bit about what you were saying before. You had a chance to deeply think about this. So how are you going to approach your job differently? Or how have you already begun to approach your job differently?
Well, one thing is, like I just said, I feel like there are days when I just don't go on Twitter. And I think that's pretty valuable.
Because it's the off year.
Well, that too. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. One thing that Twitter did during the 2012 cycle was it made small things seem big. Mm-hmm. Staff hires, endorsements, small-time endorsements, campaign infighting, what media critics call process stories, things that they don't influence voters, but they're just about politics. But because everyone in the media was on Twitter reading the same things, if Politico wrote some story about some focus group thing, all the other news organizations would feel inclined to chase it and confirm it. And all of a sudden we were all talking about the same small stuff. A lot of conversations with reporters revealed that amidst all that, there was the stuff that was like really richly reported, the magazine pieces, the long form newspaper stuff, where people really took a couple weeks to dig into, Mitt Romney's, time as a stake leader, in the Mormon Church in Belmont, or, some issue set. Those things landed with a pretty big impact because amid all of this sort of surface level snowflake journalism that sort of evaporates on contact, the meteor stuff really stood out. And I think one thing that I'm trying to do, I know a lot of my colleagues are trying to do, is I don't have to write a story every day. Why don't I take 2 or 3 days, God forbid 4 days, to like really go somewhere and talk to people and report out a story or a theme and then write it. And then it's so much richer and more valuable. And I'm sort of detecting that from a bunch of different people. And that's something I hope to do in 2016 a little bit, is kind of maybe stay away from the bubble, the bus and the plane, and really just kind of camp out.
And that's a re-education for bosses too, back in the newsroom.
Yeah, no, and
because if it's how many page views you're going to get,
right,
you can do 12 posts and get 5,000 page views, or you can do 1 post and get 10,000 page views.
Right, and the editors are going to have to figure out a balance. I mean, you're probably still going to need a horde of 20-somethings who can just crank out copy so you can get those links.
Right.
But balance that out with reporters who can maybe step back and do bigger sort of pieces.
One last thing here, then we can, if there's any other questions, go ahead and get to the mic. But you've kind of addressed this a little bit. Where is this all going? Are we just at the cusp of something new in the way it's going to be, or are we in a transition phase and we'll figure out how to use this medium better? I mean, I can imagine rapid response is very simple now. It's just keep, hit back at a reporter publicly, not just even on the phone, because if the narrative is being set on Twitter, people can see this interaction. Is that where this is headed? Or?
I mean, again, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what you thought.
I think that, well, first of all, we don't know what platforms are going to be out there. Right. I mean, Instagram sort of arrived during the campaign, and people were using Instagram throughout the campaign, not in a real negative way. It was actually kind of cool. Vine sort of popped later. We just don't know. I talked to Casey Hunt, who works for the AP now, and she mentioned Google Glass, the glasses that can stream video, right? Or they will be able to.
I'm not fancy enough. I don't have one of those.
No, I saw some guy wearing one on the plane the other day, and it was strange. But she said to me, can you imagine a candidate who walks into the back of his campaign plane and sees, 15 reporters sitting there with Google glasses, and like everything is live streamed? That's not improbable at all. And she and I were both wondering, I mean, is that going to impact things? Look, I don't see it getting better, frankly. I think campaigns are going to shut down a little bit more. There are still going to be trusted reporters, thankfully, that campaigns still talk to. It is still valuable to talk to candidates, I think. It's not being cozy. It's just important to kind of get in their head, figure out what makes them tick, figure out what motivates them. But man, if campaigns can deliver their messages on social media, with web videos on their own terms increasingly, they're going to do it. At the end of the day, the mission is to win. You don't want to get thrown off message. And I think if they can control the message, they're going to try.
Great. Well, Peter, thanks so much for coming. This is great, and if you have not read it, you should just Google it. Did Twitter kill the boys on the bus? It's right there on the first link. Really well done.
Cool.
Congratulations.
Thanks, James.
Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it. Thank you.